So, what is required for salvation? Emotions or intellect? I want to talk about this today a little bit because maybe you struggle with this a little bit in your life. Maybe you are one of these people, you sat in church, you listened to people's testimonies, and you thought, how is it that they can have a testimony like that? Why don't I have such an enthralling testimony? I mean, am I really even saved? I mean, some people, it's like, it's all about their emotions and they just feel so deeply about things. And then other people were like, I've studied everything and I have all the facts down. And I figured it all out. And I know that I'm saved because I figured all these things out. And then you sit and you say, well, I understood the message of Jesus and I've been saved. And I didn't have this great emotional experience, or I didn't study everything deeply, so I can't answer all the questions. Am I really saved or not? So you might ask the question, do I need an emotional experience? Do I need an intellectual experience? What is this? I want to help out with just some thoughts on this today that maybe it'll help you out a little bit. I want to talk about the emotional aspect of salvation, the intellectual aspect of salvation, and then a third one that really brings it all together that we don't think about quite as much when we talk about what we might call a salvation experience or something like that. So let's look first at the emotional experience. I believe that salvation does need to have some kind of emotional experience because we are just emotional beings, right? And some obviously are a lot more emotional than other people are. But some people, for them, it's all about emotions, which I think is a valid thing. Which is why if you grew up in kind of a more traditional or conservative setting, you will often hear preachers really appealing to people's emotions. I guess you probably get that about everywhere, but they really, really appeal to emotions and, tell stories about things and just try to get people to want to come running down the aisle. And sometimes they could even tell these stories and you think, man, the most devoted believer would probably come running down the aisle to get saved after some of these stories and maybe even some fear tactics, if I can put it that way. And I don't really mean that derogatorily. But, just this great emotional experience. And I've sat in many, many church services where the preacher just had to get everybody in the church down to the altar. I mean, come on down. If you've been in this church for 20 years and you haven't been to the altar, you need to come down. If you're a deacon, you need to be down here. And just really kind of shame everybody and they're not coming down to the altar. That they are looking for some kind of an emotional response to their message. Unfortunately, I think that many times this is actually more of an egotistical thing. Well, look at everybody who came down the altar, but they're appealing to emotions, and this is what all of us do to a degree when we are preaching or teaching. We're trying to get people to think about things. We're trying to get them to feel things and to really just to really get it, right? So there's some benefits to an emotional experience when it comes to salvation. I want to share these with you and I'm going to write these down in an article, so if you want to read them, you can. So a benefit of having an emotional experience is that you probably have this deep inner conviction of sin. You have really felt it, and this is so real to you. You don't just know about it, but you experience it. And this is good because emotions are so real that they cause effects in our lives. I saw this meme recently that said something like, people won't remember what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. Emotions are very, very powerful in our lives. So this brings us to the next benefit of having an emotional salvation experience, if we can say it that way, and that is that emotions cause change. When you feel something, you're more apt to change because of it. When you get upset about something is when you're actually probably going to do something about it. When you're watching TV, you ever see those sad puppy commercials? They come on, they show all these poor little puppies, and they're just so sad because, they don't have anybody to love them and to take care of them. And you just say, I want to bring them all home, right? They are appealing to your emotions. They know that if they can touch your emotions, something is going to happen. So when it comes to salvation, emotions can be a good thing because they might help turn you to Christ. You feel something. However, there's some dangers when we rely too much on emotions. And some of the dangers are, one of them that I fear is if salvation to you is primarily an emotional experience, you might not have any incentive to go further in the Christian walk. You had these emotional feelings and they got settled because you put your faith in Christ, and now you're good, right? I don't need to, I got everything I want. I felt guilt, I felt pain and torment, and now all that's taken care of, so I don't need to go any further. That could be a danger that you have to guard against. Another one is you might struggle with doubt. I had all these feelings. At one time I had these feelings, I felt it, but now my feelings are gone. Do I not have it anymore? Did I ever have it? Did I lose it? What happened here? If I felt it then, why is it I don't feel it now? I mean, I had this emotional freedom when I had my burden lifted off me, and it's not there anymore. So maybe I'm not even saved. Maybe Christianity isn't even true, because if you've been a Christian for any length of time, you know that it's not all about fuzzy feelings. It's about persecution sometimes. It's about trouble. It's about living contrary to the world. And we still have to go through all the difficulties that everybody experiences in life. And you say, well, what happened to those emotions, the great experience that I had back when I first became saved? Well, you can't depend on those things. So that's a danger of having just emotional experience. The second one is the experience might be intellectual. Okay, many people when they become saved, they have an intellectual experience. They learn about the truth, and at some point they say, you know what? That's the truth. I believe it. Okay, and many times you hear about famous apologists have been through this. Lee Strobel, very popular. He set out to disprove Christianity, and he realized it was true. J. Warner Wallace, I think John, his name slips me right now. But many of these people, if you read apologists, their stories, and they came to the conclusion, they're like, you know what, this is really true, and I really believe this. So it wasn't so much emotional. There might have been some of it, but it was mainly intellectual. And so I want to share with some benefits of having an intellectual experience, just like we did with the emotional experience. One of the benefits is that you are convinced that this stuff is true. Man, you cannot be talked out of it because you have studied these things. You had questions about them. You studied them and you looked into them. And there they are. You have answers to these things. So you know that these things are true, and you can fight to the death, man, because you know all about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. You know about his existence. You have faith in the inspiration, the reliability, and the sufficiency of the Bible. You know all this stuff because you have studied it. So that's a benefit. You are convinced of the truth of the gospel. And another benefit is that you can argue it. You're going to make a great apologist because you studied all this before you ever came to faith, and you're convinced of it. You're going to share with people. You can't just tell them, oh, well, I feel like it's true, or I know they used to teach me, but it's something in me I just know. That's not going to cut it in an argument, in a debate. But you can say, I've studied it, and here's all the reasons, and I can share with you exactly why it's true, and you ought to believe it too. Okay, so those are some benefits of having a more intellectual experience. But there are some cautions also when we rely too much on emotions, and one can be that sometime we might struggle with doubt. All those things that you have studied and learned before you came to faith, that's all cool, but what if you come up with a question that you have not answered yet? And suddenly you're faced with this, I don't know. Here's another question that for me might make all of my faith come into question. What can I believe it if I can't figure this out? So if everything is about figuring everything out, there's going to be at some point you're going to get to, and you're going to come across something you're just simply not going to have an answer to. And you might struggle and say, wait a minute, maybe I messed this whole thing up. Do I need to go all the way back to the beginning and try to study this again? Because I'm not so sure that I have this right. So you might struggle with doubts about, am I really, truly saved? You might struggle with things. I don't know how many times I heard this growing up, and a pastor or an evangelist would stand up and say, if you don't know that you know that you know that you know that you know that you're saved, then you need to come down here because you probably aren't. And the person who has come to Christ with more of an intellectual experience might say, I believe it, but I don't. What are they looking for? Some kind of feelings? I just don't have this burning or this, something. I don't have, all these people around me are crying and shouting. I don't have that, right? What's going on? Maybe I'm not saved. So it can cause some struggles with some doubts that way. And so we need to ask, is salvation something we feel inside? No, the intellectual person would, and I don't mean that derogatorily toward the emotional people, but the ones who approach salvation with just their intellect, or primarily their intellect, they might say, no, it's not something you feel, it's something that you believe because it's true. So we have these two sides, emotional and intellectual. And another thing that the person who approaches salvation intellectually might struggle with is sin, might struggle more with sin. The person who has approached salvation emotionally, they remember the weight of the sin. They remember how they just felt so bad and they finally left it. They finally got rid of that. And so maybe they'll say, you know what, I don't want to get back into it again. The person who approached salvation with an intellectual process they don't have quite the feelings. They know they're not supposed to sin, but might be more tempted to get back into sin because it hasn't really been a feeling thing. So we have some people that become saved based on more of an emotional response and some based on more of an intellectual response. So who's saved? That's the question. Who's saved? The person with the emotions or the person who's figured it all out? My answer, maybe it's your answer too, is both, either. Because we're multifaceted people. All of us approach salvation with both intellectualism and emotionalism, even though it might be more heavily weighted toward one side than the other. The intellectual person will study it out and figure it out and say, okay, this is true. This is what I got to do. The emotional person will realize that they're a sinner and they'll say, oh no, I'm in trouble. I've got to do something about this. We all know that Jesus died for wicked sinners. The person who approaches it intellectually will say, I want to know why. How did this happen? Did it really happen? The emotional person will be like, okay, I got to do something about it. Let me try to explain it this way. Let's just say you're in an airplane. Now, if you are catching up on your videos and you're on an airplane, I'm not saying this to freak you out, okay? But let's just say you're on an airplane and the pilot comes over the intercom and says, we've just lost our engines. We cannot fly any longer. You have to put on your parachute and jump out and you'll be saved. So what are you gonna do? The intellectual person or the person that approaches things intellectually will say, okay, now, first of all, was that really the pilot that said that? And he's gonna investigate it. And does he have the credentials? Does this airplane, he's a pilot, he's not a mechanic. So how does he know the engine stopped? Does he have the ability to say that? And he's gonna wanna question the pilot, okay? And he's going to wanna look for himself. Wow, look, there is smoke coming out the side of the airplane there and that engine is on fire. And so was that one over there. And he's gonna wanna research all this. The emotional person, they're gonna hear the announcement and they're gonna freak out. So right now, both the person who approaches it intellectually and emotionally, they both are in the same boat. They're both sitting in their chair. One is like, yeah, we're going to die. And the other one's like, we're going to die. But they're both sitting there. What will save their life? What will save their life is not just that they feel something about it or that they know something about it, but that they do something about it, which really brings us to our third aspect that we didn't talk about already, and that is volition. Some people approach things emotionally. Some people approach things intellectually, but we all have to approach salvation with volition. Volition means of the will. Something is an act of the will. Whether you feel it or whether you know it, you have to make a choice. That's what evangelism is all about. We try to go out and share with people we try to, share more about the fear and the judgment and all that because they're more emotional. And some, you have to just lay it out with facts. But regardless of the case, we're trying to get people to make some decision, some choice, some action. They're trying to get them to respond to Jesus. That's not any kind of a work they can do, but a response of faith is not a work. It's a response, wow, this is what Jesus did for me. I know that I need it. I feel that I need it, and I'm going to respond to it. So this has some practical application for us. One is that we need to share the truth of the gospel, because sometimes when we're sharing the truth, we're sharing the gospel with people, they are people who might approach things more intellectually. And we might have to explain to them some things about why do we believe all these things that we believe. I think this is becoming more so in our world today. People are questioning, and they really want some kind of a truth. Why do you guys think you have the truth? We need to be able to share with them why we have the truth. But we also need to touch their emotions, because people need to feel it. Why do you think that the Bible talks so much about hell for unbelievers and rewards for believers? It's not just because we need to know this. Oh, well, that's interesting. We know that there's a hell. We know that there are rewards for believers. Cool. No, it's because it's supposed to touch the emotions. Wow, if you don't put your faith in Jesus, there is an eternal hell for you. If you do put your faith in Jesus, there is eternal heaven. And if you serve him, there are also rewards. And that should appeal to our emotions. I want that. I want that, so I'm going to do something about it. Or I don't want that, so I'm going to do something about it. And so when we share the gospel, we need to share the truth, give people reasons to believe. We need to touch their emotions with the gospel, but then encourage a response. That is the volitional act, an act of the will. People will respond with some level of emotion, some level of intellect of thinking through things. And they all need to come with an act of volition, an act of the will. I'm going to put my faith in Jesus Christ. I'm going to trust in him. Well, I hope that helps. Some of you may have struggled with things like this. Maybe my testimony isn't good enough. Maybe I didn't come the right way. Ultimately, it's all about you deciding you're going to put your faith in Jesus Christ. God bless you guys. I'll see you in the next video.